Good morning, everyone. Dr. Christine Smith here, specializes in women's hormones. So I am just going to go ahead and invite her on here. But Dr. Vandenberg is a naturopath, and she's been working in women's health for nearly 20 years. Her passion is helping women achieve health through hormonal balance. Hi, Dr. Vandenberg. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks, Christine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I was just telling everyone a little bit about you, that you've been a naturopath in the field of women's healthcare for over 20 years. And I was about to say you've been working on developing like some online coursework that women can do too, just to help them through a really challenging transition in life. And
Yeah,
it's like hormones are always confusing, and it becomes even more confusing when your brain's not working the same way. And just a whole bunch of stuff. So let's just dive right in, and maybe you can say in your own words, just telling people a little bit about yourself and what made you passionate about working in this realm.
sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, like you were saying, it's been almost 20 years that I've been practicing. And I think what has happened sort of naturally is that my practice has evolved along with my own phase of life. And so, closer to 18-ish years ago, when I was in the phase of life of building my family, I was working more with fertility and period repair and all of that. And that has sort of evolved over time. And now I'm in my 40s and finding myself in this phase. And I just found my patients, I mean, obviously my patients, a lot of them I've been seeing for that long, and so they've grown with me. But I think we also tend to attract people who are similar to where we are in life. And that I've just found happens naturally. Really working with hormones was partly inspired by a trip that I took. Actually, I took a year off when I was studying naturopathic medicine. I spent some time in Asia. I had a close friend there who was maybe about 20-ish years older than me. And she came to me once and she was terrified by this experience that she was having. And she actually said, "I think I'm dying." And I was like, whoa, let's talk about what's going on. And the reality was, when she explained to me what she was feeling, like she would have these sensations and then her heart would race and her hands were sweaty and she couldn't think straight. And I was like, "I think you're having a hot flash." And we talked it through, and I realized she had no idea. And I found over the years that there's just not that much talk about our hormones. I find we don't really talk about our periods that much. We do talk about pregnancy, and that's great. Fertility, something we keep pretty close and quiet. And then perimenopause. I think women are often going through this shift in life. And number one, not really talking about it, feeling alone. And number two, not knowing how many of the symptoms that they might be experiencing, or just the way they're experiencing life, can be attributed to these fluctuations in their hormones. So all of that. How's that for an answer?
That's a great answer. And so part of the reason that I love doing these live, right, is I can see little comments come in from people. So one of them that I think we can sprinkle into our conversation as we go is things like environmental hormone disruptors, like things in the water or things
Oh,
in containers of things we consume and how that affects stuff. So we'll touch on that at the right time.
for
But let's
sure.
just start with like defining the stage that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I love how you're describing it through what people are actually experiencing, right? Because I think a lot of the time in healthcare, we'll talk about like the physiology behind stuff, which is great, but also you have to know what symptoms that ties to. And that's where we get a true understanding. So I'd love
Yeah.
if you could touch on that.
We'll talk about all of it.
Sweet.
Yeah, so the phase of life, I think this is really important for people to realize, because you and I, working in healthcare, are familiar with this term perimenopause. A lot of people aren't. It's not really a commonly heard term. So the term perimenopause refers to the years of transition leading up to menopause. So you're in menopause when your reproductive years are complete and you haven't had a period for a year. Then we call that menopause. The whole time that your hormones are on this roller coaster, overall declining, but in a roller coaster kind of way, that's
Usually
all.
spiking more first and getting a little more
Yeah,
irregular.
exactly. So that is all perimenopause. And that can actually be, for many women, around a 10-year phase of life. So really significant. And if we do simple math, I mean, the average age in North America for menopause is 51. That means your last period around 50. If you're going to transition for 4 years before that, that's basically all of your 40s. And then keep in mind that that 50, 51 is an average. So for some people, it's going to be as early as their late 30s, and that often is under-recognized. And for some, it's going to be later, and they're going to be in their early 50s and still dealing with these fluctuations and finding themselves potentially frustrated there. So the term perimenopause is that transition, and that's kind of what I thought we'd focus on today.
Perfect. No, I love that because I think, I have clients of a variety of ages, especially within the age range that you just talked about. And it is really easy to see hormone fluctuations earlier than you'd expect, or be able to have a kid later than you'd expect. And it's like, it's very dependent on people, and this generalization that we tend to do in society of like kind of scaring women about like when they might be able to do certain things in their life. I think it's really individual and independent. And I just want to tell women that so that you know that that's something that you can ask questions about and investigate for yourself, and maybe work with a functional provider to find out what's actually realistic for you rather than operating off of like a generalization and fear-based thing. And then I have also been seeing comments about like asking about grounding and things like that. And I think we can tie that into our conversation because, hormones are affected by so many different things in life, and that can also be stress. And let's definitely touch on the component that I think you mentioned. I watched a bunch of your reels. So for anyone who hasn't followed Dr. Vandenberg, her channel's awesome, and she does all these reels about physiology and hormones and what this hormone does in your brain, and it's really cool. But in talking about that, you're discussing how when we hit this stage and our hormones are fluctuating, sometimes we have less resiliency for certain situations than we used to. So let's talk a little bit more like physiologically, like what's happening and why that might be the case. And we'll just kind of start at the beginning of the fluctuations and go from there.
Yeah, for sure. So if we want to start at the beginning, let's look at like the textbook fertile cycle, right? 28 days. And of course, there's so much variation from this, but for simplicity's sake, let's talk about a 28-day cycle and what's actually happening. So in the first half of that cycle, the focus of your body and of your hormones, your reproductive hormones anyway, is on creating a healthy egg to ovulate on day 14, and then preparing the body for implantation should it be conditions in which pregnancy occur. So that starts with, in that first half of the cycle, we have a dominant, estrogen is really the dominant reproductive hormone. And that helps support the growing egg. This is one of the things I talked about in one of the reels that you were just referring to, is that when ovulation happens, the egg leaves the shell. And that shell makes the progesterone that becomes the dominant hormone in the second half of the cycle. So even in our regular, like, fertile years, we have a dominance of estrogen and then a dominance of progesterone. So we have fluctuation and we feel different through the month. So what happens as we age, we get a decrease in ovarian function. It's supposed to slow down. Like, I like to emphasize that this is natural. We're not meant to be fertile forever. That window is going to be different for every woman, but we're not meant to be fertile forever. So at some point we want to stop ovulating and stop having our periods. And by the way, you absolutely can get pregnant. You're still fertile through your perimenopausal phase. So because that's declining, what we get is these eggs get ovulated and they're a bit less robust. And so sometimes those less robust eggs just make less progesterone. Other times, our estrogen just isn't high enough for us to even, or factors are such that we don't even ovulate at all. And then we barely make any progesterone. And so you can see how, because sometimes we ovulate and sometimes we don't, we get this variation 1 month to the next in physiologically what our hormones are doing. So they're all, it really is, you were doing this, I think I was doing that earlier. It really is like this roller coaster effect.
Well, and I'd love if you could touch on like, or at least to my understanding, most of the time there's usually when you're younger, it's like a little bit of a smoother hormone fluctuation. And
Hmm.
then as we start to get into the perimenopausal region, which can be even in your 30s, we start to get these kind of like spikes and it's just a little less
Right.
rounded. And this is
Yeah.
why all of a sudden the mood can just be a little bit sharper and things like that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah. So a big part of it is the balance between the hormones. So the estrogen and progesterone. I was reading something the other day. I think I was on an internet rabbit hole, and someone referred to estrogen and progesterone like Ernie and Bert. And like they were, I think the perimenopausal women out there remember Ernie and Bert.
Not fair. It's not far off.
They work as a pair, right? They're a really great pair, and you always see them together. And they balance each other. And so what can happen is that if you have too much of one and not enough of the other, that's where we start to get these symptoms. And so progesterone, for example, is a very grounding hormone. It helps you feel calm. And so if you don't have as much progesterone as you normally would in the second half of your cycle, you can feel really ungrounded. You can be easily overwhelmed. You're not as resilient. Stresses. What I hear in practice a lot is like, these things didn't used to bother me. And now they feel so stressful, or I just feel like I can't handle them in the same way, or multitask in the same way, or like focus in the same way. And it's real. And there's physiology behind all that. So it's not just like aging and normal, or you're depressed, or you might be, but it's, let's not just attribute it to that.
Yeah. And then I think we're going to talk more about like other things that contribute to why you might be experiencing a stronger level of anxiety or depression than you might if you were doing different lifestyle factors as you go through this transition. But I know I think we can talk about like what people expect to see during this time. But one of the other questions that had popped into my mind while you were talking is, and I think it's so relevant for the majority of women in society, how does being put on birth control early in your life affect your ability to produce progesterone later in your life?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. And it's quite different for everyone. Just like
Okay.
you might notice, for some people who come off the pill, their period just comes back.
Mhm.
And everything seems just fine. Other women, it takes a really long time, or they might need some like support to get their period back. So we all respond to things differently. But basically the pill suppresses the whole system.
Right.
And for some people that can really throw you off and make it really hard to get that like up and running again once you're off the pill. Others seem to bounce back with that more. And maybe it's about some of those other resiliency pieces like your adrenal function and your thyroid function and your pituitary function. I mean, all our hormones talk to each other. But if you think of, I think we often think of the pill as this like balancer. What it's really actually doing is like pressing stop on everything and then giving you this artificial bit of hormone that's just enough to keep you from ovulating.
Mm-hmm.
And you get this like fake period when, monthly, just because the hormones are withdrawn. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but it can absolutely affect, because it can be really hard to rebalance when you've shut that part of your body off for so long.
It does. I just wanted to bring it up because I think a lot of women are less educated about it than they might like to be.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, this is why if you decide that you want to get off, like let's say that you've been on birth control for a while and you want to get off of it and get pregnant, and then all of a sudden you're having a hard time, it can be because your body can take even up to a couple of years to rebalance and try to get a hormonal rhythm back, especially if it was started really early, like when you're in your teens, when your body's still figuring it out. So it's like your body has to work through those things. And this is why we do these kinds of education for people, and why Dr. Vandenberg has done stuff like Women's Health Online, where you can learn more about your hormones and understand your body, because I am a firm believer that helping people understand how their physiology works and how to work with their own body in a friendly and synergistic way instead of fighting it is like the only way that we're truly going to have evolution and health in our society. So let's talk about what people might experience as they start to enter this transition. So we kind of talked about like the spikes and like
Yeah.
the mood maybe not being quite as fluid as it used to be. But what are some other tidbits on that?
Yeah. So what I find is that, I mean, again, it's different for everyone, but so we often think about hot flashes and night sweats, and the story kind of stops there. It's like, yeah, you're going to have hot flashes and night sweats, and then your period's going to stop, and that's the end of the story. What we often forget to or neglect to attribute to these hormone fluctuations, and I can get into the why behind this.
Yes, I love the
I'd love to
why.
chat. Yeah, I know. This is Dr. Smith. This is why I love talking to you, because you love the why. So what happens often before that is symptoms like these mental emotional symptoms that I talked about. There can be metabolic changes where you notice that the foods you eat just aren't working for you the same way. The way you were exercising before isn't having the same effect. So certainly mental, emotional, metabolic. You can notice changes in like your hair, your nails, your skin, your energy. Energy is a big one that we see, sort of this decline in energy, which there's good reason for. And like we talked about, your resilience overall, and maybe your ability to feel grounded.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when we come back to, so like she was mentioning the grounding thing, I said we'd touch on that later. So for those who aren't super familiar, grounding can come in a lot of ways. It can come with like literally the physical grounding of like your feet touching the earth and the ion exchange that happens between your body and the earth's surface. And that
Mm-hmm.
literally grounds your energy. Or it can be more in like a meditative way where you're actually using your intention to send your energy downward and kind of, for lack of a better term, feel more on earth. I think a lot of us spend our time up here in our thoughts, and you like forget that you have a body and you're just on autopilot in your body. And that's another easy thing to happen when your hormones are changing, is your body will kind of go back to its autopilot programs, but then you're like realizing that these programs don't totally work anymore. So grounding, when it comes to like relieving stress or managing stress, it matters for your hormones. And we can also talk about, the nutrition aspects. This is, so like if we think about, our holistic health, we have like physical, chemical, which is going to be like environmental and nutritional, and mental, and that's like our stress. So this is just a very basic energetic technique that we're talking about to come back into your body and manage your stress. And I wanted to bring it up because I do think it's important. I think it's probably the thing people forget about the majority of the time. And it's something that you should probably be
Mm-hmm.
doing multiple times a day, especially in today's society, and especially if you're multitasking and doing 8 million things. And, that goes for moms who might be going through this, and you're doing the 8 million mom things because you take care of everybody. Like, just take a second when you're in the bathroom and like ground for a minute. And it's not going to make any difference if you're in the bathroom for 1 minute longer, and it can make a really big shift in your day. But then coming back to stress and why this ends up affecting our hormones. So
Mm-hmm.
our stress cascade uses the same building blocks as do our sex hormones. And, there's always updates in research, and I'm always trying my best to stay up to date on the research. And in most of the time, there's something that's been called like the cortisol steal or the pregnenolone steal. And these are the building blocks for your sex hormones. And then there's been people looking at it being like, well, it's not really a steal, and getting kind of nitpicky about it. And ultimately what it translates to is when there's something going on in your body, it's going to drive cycles down that pathway. If there's something else going on in your body, it'll drive cycles down that pathway. So if there's stress going on, you're going to be giving more of your resources to the stress pathway. If there's not stress going on, you have more of your resources to give to the sex hormone pathway. So this is why if you're super stressed out all the time, it really affects things like your libido. So this pertains to everything that we're talking about and I talk about this because this is like an average person, right? I see this person in
Mm-hmm.
my office. Dr. Vandenberg sees these people in her office. And it's basically, you know, your average person who's working really hard, who has a family that does all the things, who's also dealing with bills and like worrying about sending their kids to college, and then worrying about that other kid who's doing something that you can't control, but you're still worried about them because you care about them, or some other family member. And especially now, if you're in middle age, you might also be in a caretaker role, and that's a lot
Yeah.
of pressure and a lot of stress. So not to say that those things are going to go away, right? Because that's just life. That's just real life. But it's learning how to manage yourself and your own energy in a way where you're not pouring from the pitcher without refilling it. We have to refill the pitcher before we pour, and this is how we maintain our health over a lifetime and prevent ourselves from degrading and degenerating earlier than we'd like. We want to be vivacious into our later years. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts around physiology on that.
Wow, yeah, that was a lot to chime in on, and I feel like as you're talking about all that, and some of the questions are coming up, like the questions about environmental components.
Totally. Yeah, we can talk about that too.
I feel like we could have 10 conversations about this. So sometimes I summarize, or I like kind of wrap up that whole. I hear you on that piece about you know, the progesterone steal, and does it exist and does it not, and sometimes I think that doesn't totally matter, and I think it's just our way of explaining things, just like I loved how you explained it, that like you put your resources here or you put your resources here. When you are super stressed, like I like to think of even species beyond humans. Like we all have very similar physiology when you look at any animals in the animal kingdom. When you are super stressed, so when you're, let's say you're in danger, it's not time to reproduce. Right? Like reproduce would not be a safe thing to do when you're in danger, because you need to like protect what you've got. And so I look at it that way. Like that is ultimately what's the way our hormones are playing out, is that your body is putting this stop on and saying, you can't reproduce right now. It's not safe.
Yes. Yep. And that's, I talk to a lot of my clients. So my niche is more holistic injury recovery, right? But what we're talking about, like they're not separate. They go together. And when it comes to things like injury, you can also, it can be a physical injury, but I retrain people on how to think of injury. And injury can also be like a traumatic event. It can basically be an injury to your nervous system, and or like a car, or it doesn't even have to be something physical. It can just be something stressful, and then you can get like an injury to your gut. And then if we keep eating foods with a bunch of additives that really damage our gut, especially after it's already injured, it gets further injured. And if your gut is messed up, it's definitely going to mess up your hormones, because it's how your body processes hormones and detoxes them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything around like the hormone detox pathways and why they are important to all the stuff that we're talking about, because I think they get skipped over all the time in hormone stuff, and people don't even understand them or know about them, or like know why it's important to poop every day in regard to your hormones. So
true.
Yeah.
So we make these hormones, we use them, they bind all over our bodies, they do their things, they have their effect. And then they need to be broken down in order to leave our body. We don't want them there forever. It's like they're used up. And usually in breaking them down, there are all these chemical, like I won't get into the biochemistry behind it, but there are all these chemical processes, these steps. So it becomes, your estrogen becomes this, and then this, and then this, and then this, as it gets broken down. So a lot of that happens, for example, in the liver. And this is one place that we can touch on the environmental component. There are certainly hormone disruptors in our environment, and that's a bit of another topic. But there are also so many chemicals in our environment, pesticides on our food, pollution in the air, that affects our liver, because our liver detoxes those too. So if your liver if you think of it like a filter, if the liver's full, it has a harder time filtering those hormones through and breaking them down. So you can get a bit of a backlog. And that can be an issue, because sometimes the form that some of those like intermediate forms of the hormone can be more dangerous, more like stronger than what they were in their initial state, right? So breaking them down, if you're freeing them up or they're getting backlogged and they're not continuing through that process, that can actually be more harmful.
And I think understanding this is why I bring it up, right? Like we can't educate you guys on everything in this talk, but we can make you curious enough to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that there's a whole detox pathway involved and like 3 different kinds of estrogen, and that some of them play a good role and some of them play a not good role. And if
Yep.
you have the ones that play a not good role too high, then that's not good for your system overall, and certainly not good for having your hormones balanced as you age, and something that probably needs to be looked at to be protective and preventative, because that's what functional medicine is about. It's about understanding your body to a point so well that you don't end up with a condition, because you just know how to take care of yourself and you can tell when something's off, versus just like numbing yourself out to all of it and not understanding it at all, which I think is probably why a lot of people are struggling with their health so much right now, is because we've just been trained to not really listen to our body, and we've been trained to not really pay attention until the problems are severe, and that's when they're much harder to turn around. So let's loop back around to blood sugar and thyroid, because I know you mentioned those, and I think those are other things I'd really love people to understand more about.
Let's totally talk about that. I'm going to complete the question that you asked before, because I realized that you brought up this important point that makes people a little squeamish sometimes, but like, why is it important to poop every day? So the next step after the liver is that gets dumped into your digestive system, the bacteria in your gut, work on it some more. So it's important to have proper gut bacteria. And that's where Dr. Christine was just talking about the gut flora and why that matters. And then you need to clear out the waste. It's waste. So you've got to get rid of it every single day. And that's maybe a segue into talking about other ways that that our bodies balance with our hormones. Maybe that's a weird segue. I'm understanding the biochemistry behind that, but there's a lot of steps.
Well, no, I think it's really important. And I bring these things up because, I don't know, people are weird talking about poop, but I talk about it to all my clients, because I had a client once and no one had ever told her that she was supposed to poop more than once a week, because no one ever talked to her about it. And so she just didn't know. She didn't even know there was anything wrong. So again, just knowledge for you to be able to ask the right questions. But yes, let's segue into the other physiology you wanted to touch on.
Yeah. So when I talked a while back about estrogen and progesterone and being in balance, and Ernie and Bert and how they need to like balance each other, one of the things that happens that, again, I think accounts for some of the under-recognized physiology that happens in this transition, is that our hormones actually all talk to each other. So our reproductive hormones aren't just about reproduction. Your progesterone, for example, well, your estrogen too, they have a big effect on your thyroid function. So your thyroid is this gland, right? This gland that makes the hormones that help you with your metabolism. So you can think of it as like the gas pedal of your car. If you've got not enough, everything is slow. If you've got too much, everything is revved up and too fast. And both of those are harmful and uncomfortable states to be in. So our hormones that are naturally changing play a role in your thyroid function. And so we see a shift. Often that shift happens in the form of going hypothyroid, which means your thyroid functions less. And that means that everything is slowing down. So your digestion, we just talked about digestion, that can slow down, because that whole detoxification process can slow down. Our thought processes, our energy, all of it can slow. And it's also one of the reasons that you can notice a shift in your body composition at this time.
Excellent. Thank you. And so for those who are wondering about like what this might look like in your life, right? So thyroid stuff is often tied to skin, hair, energy, nails, temperature, things like that. So if you're like really cold all the time and your hair is kind of starting to fall out and your nails are getting kind of weak and your skin is just like having a bit of a hard time, it doesn't mean that you are like unfixable. It just means that that organ needs some support. And this is what I like to teach people is like, notice that now and then recognize that it's your body asking for help. Yeah. And that's how I kind of train people to look at this in a really sustainable way. So just know that those things can be supported. And that might mean like you may need some additional minerals. You may need some additional vitamins. You might need to slow down and take a break and relax a little bit because your thyroid is not separate from your adrenals. And your
Yeah.
adrenals are kind of like this reserve gas tank in your body. And if you're doing the 8 million things and you're never refilling the pitcher, it gets empty. Like it needs
Hmm.
time to refill. And then if it gets empty, it draws on other resources that compensate, but then that makes them work in a way that they're not really supposed to work. And then they get drained, and then they pull on
Yeah.
something else and it gets drained. And then this is the cascade of this is how people usually end up with a condition that they're struggling with, is just not paying attention to it early enough where everything starts to get taxed.
Yeah.
And, you know, and this can be related to blood sugar too. And so
Hmm.
that also kind of comes back to liver and adrenals. So let's go back to the environmental toxin component. If your liver is super burdened with environmental toxins because you, and I'm just going to put this out there, let's say you like drink soda all the time and you use Roundup on your weeds and it's something that
Yeah.
you're regularly doing, that is a toxic burden on your body. Same thing with like eating a lot of junk food that has a lot of additives. It's just a toxic burden on your body. And I think a lot of people get confused because they're like, well, this is good and this is bad. And they make it this black and white thing where I'm like, well, it's more about the overall load. Like, yeah, you can have some junk food sometimes during the
Yeah.
holidays. Like, I don't want to tell you that you can't enjoy your life. Just don't do it for like months in a row. Or like if you're getting puffy and you have a headache, maybe like don't do it again the next day and just give your
Yeah.
body time to recover.
Yeah.
And, you know, just notice that it's the system that you're maintaining. But so if your liver's taxed with those components, and then you're also doing the 8 million things, so let's go back to that, you know, model of the mom who has the kids and maybe the one kid that she's worried about, but then she's also a caretaker and she's also taking care of family and she's cooking Christmas dinner and doing all of these things.
Hmm.
It's like that's a lot. So you just have to allow yourself time to rest and recover and maybe ask for help. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
people like to feel valued when you ask for help. That's a
Yeah.
good thing. And so then if we can keep these things balanced, then maybe after the holiday, you won't like plummet in energy because you balanced it throughout. So that's just one example. But the
Hmm.
reason it affects your blood sugar is because if those organs tank and are imbalanced, your liver is responsible for like basically giving backup energy and breaking down sugars so that you can turn it into energy. And then your adrenals are like the backup reserve for that. But Dr. Vandenberg, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your take on that physiology.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And we can add to that that this is a process. So that process has been happening all the time, right? Since we were born, we've been trying
Yep.
to balance our blood sugar.
Yeah.
We have been trying to. We have been balancing our blood sugar. Um, it's how we get our energy.
Yep.
But when the messaging for that changes. So, for example, progesterone and insulin are like they're good friends. And when your progesterone declines, your cells often become less responsive to the insulin. And so your insulin levels go up. We call this insulin resistance. It takes more insulin to bring the blood sugar down. And so what we see is that over time, the cells are less and less good at listening to the insulin. So maybe I'll back up a little bit. When you eat sugar, the sugar goes into your blood. And it could be sugar like from a candy bar, but it could also be fruit or a potato or vegetables. Like there's sugar in almost everything. So your blood sugar goes up, and then we send out insulin, which tells our cells to open up and take that sugar in. And then they can use it as energy, and the blood sugar level stays at a happy place. So when we get into this insulin resistant phase, which we're just much more vulnerable to when we don't have as much progesterone, it takes more and more insulin for the cells to go, oh yeah, right, I'm supposed to open and take in the sugar. Insulin, I mean, here we can tie this all back to so much of what I'm sure you see with injury recovery. Higher insulin, you get more inflammation, you have a harder time healing, harder time coping with stress, and you have a harder time balancing your blood sugar. So we can tie it back to the effect of you get these spikes in blood sugar, and that can make you feel really irritable and not grounded and not focused. And so it kind of all ties together.
And I want to just rewind it back to the first thing she said when she started, just in case you missed it. So when your hormones start to change and fluctuate and go down, either with perimenopause, menopause, being super stressed out to the point that your hormones are going down, it makes you insulin resistant. So this is why the same foods aren't going to work in the same way when your body starts transitioning, and why you might need to pay attention and make some shifts in your lifestyle for your body to function optimally. So
Yeah.
just wanted to reiterate that part because I think it was
Well
really
said.
important.
Well said. Yeah. And it goes back to, I mean, maybe the take home in all of this is just how interconnected our hormones are and how our bodies are. And so one, to be aware that there's something going on in the background. And at the very beginning, as we started chatting, we talked about this, but the idea that like, you're not going crazy, this is real physiology, but it also means there are places that we can work. And so yes, our hormones in perimenopause are supposed to decline. That's supposed to happen. But that downstream effect that it has on our thyroid, our blood sugar, our metabolism, those are all places that we can work. So we can work on maybe eating a bit differently to balance your blood sugar, or supporting your thyroid in other ways. And you can feel so much better. You don't just have to go, oh, this is a tough phase of life, I guess I better suck it up and carry on.
Yes, that's the other thing, right? Is everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you just have to deal with it. Sorry." It's like, well,
I know.
no, it's your body sending you signals that it needs some extra support.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't have to be miserable the entire time. And this is why we do what we do as practitioners, and why we like teach what we teach and things like that. So I know, like, I want to respect your time. So I'm sure it'll take us a few minutes to kind of wind down here. I wanted to make one comment looping it back to like thyroid and brain. And then I know you had some thoughts around like what people can do to help kind of get these things into balance, or like what tests that you might look at for people to help them determine what's actually going on for them.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes back, so we talked about like blood sugar and liver and how this is all related. Then when we talk about, I'm going to go back to the stress component because I think it's something that everybody deals with, especially it's just been a lot lately. And it matters because if we're stressed, then we're upregulating our stress pathway in our adrenals. And that uses building blocks. Like one of my favorite examples to give is something called tyrosine, which is an amino acid. It's found in meat and foods and all that kind of stuff. But it's a building block for your stress pathway, like epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, that kind of thing. And then it's also a building block for your dopamine, which is like your happy motivation, get up and go, like get stuff done, reward yourself neurotransmitter. And it's the building block for your thyroid hormone. So if your diet is not great and you're not getting enough of this, or you're super stressed out and it's all being shunted into your stress pathway, you're not going to be able to make your thyroid hormone as much. And your thyroid is basically responsible for helping your cells process energy. Like the simplest way that I can put it. So if your thyroid is off, not only will your energy be off, but your cellular function is not going to be as effective. And then when it comes to dopamine, again, that's like your motivation and your happy neurotransmitter, along with serotonin, of course, but dopamine's a big one. And so that is why when you're super stressed out, it can make you feel a little bit more apathetic and kind of steal your motivation, in addition to physically feeling tired and those kinds of things. And then it also affects how you process your blood sugar and all that. So I wanted to say that because I wanted to bring it back to neurotransmitters and talk a little bit about the brain stuff that happens during this phase where your hormones are shifting, because I think this is where a lot of women will feel very alone. And it's like, yes, we're talking about perimenopause and stuff right now. Men also go through their own hormone shifts in this time period. So it's like it applies to them too in their own way. But, and like our physiology on a foundational level works quite similarly. We just have different levels that we're working with different hormones. But same thing with men. Like if you're super stressed out, your thyroid's going to behave in the same way and you're going to have the same effects. But when it comes to the mental component, this is why you can feel some brain fog. It's why you can feel less sharp. It's why you can feel more irritable. And I'd love if you talk a little bit about the progesterone, like GABA component and just other neurotransmitter stuff.
Yeah. This is one of those reels that Dr. Christine was referring to.
It's so good.
So there's this neurotransmitter that is called GABA, and it helps to calm your nervous system. So a neurotransmitter is the chemicals, or neurotransmitters are the chemicals that drive your nervous system. So when GABA binds in your nervous system, it helps to calm you down. So it helps to relieve anxiety. It helps you to feel more grounded. It helps you to sleep better. It helps you to just feel in a happier, more calm space. If you think GABA, just think calming. So one of the really cool things about progesterone is that when we break down progesterone, so we talked earlier about estrogen and how we break that down. Same thing happens with progesterone. It goes through all these steps. And one of the steps creates an intermediate that actually fits into the GABA receptor. So it goes into the nervous system and it can fit into that GABA receptor and cause the same or elicit the same response as GABA. And so when our progesterone levels go down, it's kind of like our GABA levels are going down and that we're just not getting as much of that signaling to be calm and to sleep at night and to like relax and unwind.
This might be like the running mind that won't shut up, that kind of thing.
Yes. Putting your nervous system into rest and restore instead of fight or flight. So GABA does that, but so does the breakdown of progesterone.
Yep. And when it comes to managing these things with lifestyle, which I think we'll just kind of probably wrap up with, this is why things like meditation or the grounding thing that we talked about earlier matter, is because that is how you can produce these things naturally on your own. But you have to like sit down with intention and instruct your brain to do it. And you have to battle the racing mind and all that stuff, which is why most people hate meditation, right? Is because you go and you sit into it and everything that makes you anxious or stressed out pops into your head. Right. But that's because your brain is running on an automatic program. Yeah. So if you can sit there and you can use your willpower and your intention to just keep coming back to yourself and keep kind of grounding, and you know, if you need a physical thing to work on, if this is new to you, you can basically just imagine your energy flowing like this and like flowing down and almost tethering you to the earth. And like, that's a really, really simple one, right? And just allowing yourself to do that for a minute or 2 minutes. And I want to hold this up so that people can understand like the beauty of what we're talking about. So this is a really simple map, very simple map of your hormone pathways. And these are all of the different things that your hormones have to go through to turn into the next hormone, and how they can get like stolen and go down one pathway instead of another pathway and things like that. So just to give you like a visual of what we're talking about, because they are kind of difficult concepts and there's a lot of moving pieces involved. But anyway, let's go into the lifestyle components of like what people can do or what tests you might run or how you like to help people and how you like to work with them.
Yeah, so my assessment for people in this, for women in this phase or stage, is often a bit surprising to women, because women who want testing often are like, I need to know what my estrogen and progesterone levels are like because I'm in perimenopause. So what surprises them is that those actually aren't even the key things that I test. It's, you know, there's some value to those and there are times when I use those. But, you know, we've talked a lot about how estrogen and progesterone actually jump around a lot. And so since we don't know what moment in time we're capturing when you have your blood drawn, we don't necessarily know like where you're supposed to be at that, on that day or at that time, right? So there's so much fluctuation, it can be hard to capture an accurate reading of what your estrogen and progesterone levels are like. What we can, but some really valuable information that we can get is, what's your thyroid function like? Because maybe it's the effect on the thyroid is a really key place where we might need to work for you. I look into blood sugar. So I check blood sugar levels and fasting insulin. And that gives us an idea of how well your cells are listening to the insulin. And so is blood sugar imbalance, and it commonly comes up that blood sugar imbalance actually might be like one of the drivers of the way you're feeling, your energy or your irritability or whatnot. So I look at thyroid, I look at blood sugar. We didn't talk much about nutrients. Maybe we can do that some other time, but I look at iron and B12 levels because they play such a key role for our energy. So those are some of the big ones. I look at vitamin D a lot because this is another conversation, but we want to make sure we've got good immune health and bone health as we're going into the next phase of life. So it's more of these like trickle down effect things that I like to look at and say, okay, here are some answers about where we can work to restore balance. It's not necessarily just about what can we do to get your progesterone higher.
Right, because hormones are secondary messengers. So if you only fix the messenger and you don't fix the thing that's messing up the signal, then it's kind of not a true solution. And if you're trying to do something around maybe like fertility in your later years, it really, really matters to make sure the rest of your system is balanced if you're trying to create a nourishing environment to grow a little human. So just keep that in mind as you're doing hormone work, like make sure all your other systems are balanced too, so that you can foster what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that sums it up.
Absolutely. Let's see. I have one last environmental question, then we'll wrap up because I think this is a good question. So how do things like fluoride in the water tie into like thyroid and hormone issues? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's kind of a big topic too. But
I know. We won't be able to dive into it totally, but maybe just like a thought.
Let's just sum it up and say that fluoride can be toxic to your thyroid. Too much of anything, like we do need some fluoride in our bodies.
Too much of anything.
But too
That's
much of anything.
Best answer. Yeah.
Too much of anything can be harmful. And
even vitamin D.
Yeah.
Which is why it's important to have your levels tested.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. It can have an effect. It can, one of the jobs of the thyroid is, as it makes hormones, it uses iodine and other such things, or your body uses iodine and other such things to convert your hormones. Fluoride can throw that off. But so can many things. So can bromine and chlorine, and like so many metals can be toxic to the thyroid. Yep. Too much.
And I've seen a couple of comments of people being like, oh, fluoride. That's not the only one, guys. Like, this is why a water filter matters. Like, that is one of many things in our environmental toxin load. And it's like, we only have so much control over that stuff, right? So don't drive yourself insane. But just making the small lifestyle changes that we're talking about, like, or like a simple one would be like, get a water filter. Like a high quality water filter that you plug in once and you don't think about anymore. That's one of those things for health where you like plug it in and it's done and you like don't think about it until you have to change the filter. Or an air filter. Those are simple ones because all of these environmental toxins can affect all the organs that we're talking about and all the physiology that we're talking about. Lifestyle choices like consuming a lot of sugar late at night contributes to that entire sugar pathway that she was just talking about. And if you have like this insatiable craving for sugar late at night, you might want to figure out why you have an insatiable sugar craving late at night. That's a slightly imbalanced physiological state. You shouldn't crave it quite that much. And so that's yet one more signal of your body being like, hey, I need some support somewhere. So anyway, I could talk to Dr. Vandenberg about this stuff for days. So thank you so much for your time. If people want to learn more about like your women's health online, or they want to work with you, even if like maybe you're not ready to work with a practitioner yet, but you just kind of want to get started on stuff and then maybe move into that later, how can they find you? Where should they go? All that stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. And so, yes, Women's Health Online is where you'll find information about my programs. What you can do is a couple things. You can follow me on Instagram, and in the link in my bio, you'll see a link to Women's Health Online. You'll also see the opportunity to join my wait list for the next perimenopause program that will start in the new year. And you can't even sign up for it yet, but you can sign up for the wait list. And that way you'll be, well, there are a few things. One is you'll be the first to know. You get dibs, space is limited, so you'll get dibs on a spot. I offer spots to my wait list first. And just as a holiday bonus, I've thrown in a bonus, a discount bonus, basically $100 off for those on the wait list before December 23rd. So get on the wait list now. You'll get the coupon for that bonus should you want to register in January. You'll also get first dibs on your spot when the doors open in the new year.
Beautiful.
So yeah, join that waitlist, follow me on Instagram, or check out womenshealthonline.ca. So I'm in Canada, I'm in Ontario. So remember, it's a .ca.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time for this. And, I hope if you guys like this kind of stuff, like please comment below and let us know what you want to learn more about because we love doing this.
Yeah.
Like this
Yeah.
is what this is what we were trained to do, and it's really hard to do in like a quick appointment with people. So it's really fun to get to share the information with you, but the best is when we know exactly what information you want to know. So comment below the video with anything that you want to learn in the future. We'll keep doing these. She and I did another one in the past. You can find it kind of back in my old posts. But yeah, so we love you guys, and thanks for taking the time to listen. And yeah, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to add because someone just recently joined like a minute ago and said, is this recorded? So yes,
Yes.
you'll be able to go back and watch this from the beginning. Just click on it in the, what do you call it, in the grid.
Yeah, so I think I'll add her as a collaborator, so it will be hosted in both of our accounts, but you can literally
Great.
just click my name at the top. That will take you to my page. It will be in my posts, and anytime I do a talk like this, I try to have like a little cover page. So if it has a cover page, it means that it's a longer, in-depth talk, because people are always watching reels and asking for more information. This is where the more information is. So you can click on that, and then I always tag the practitioner that I'm doing it with. So if you want to go to their page, you just click on their tag, takes you right there. Try to make life as easy as possible for everyone. So
okay, and I'm going to throw in one more quick comment. I feel like we could talk forever, but I just saw this, like, love it. People are loving what we're talking about, so that's great. I'm trying to listen to you and read the comments at the same time.
I know, it's a lot.
Someone said, love it. Perimenopause, not so much. So let's just end on a positive note and say it's not all bad and it's not all uncomfortable symptoms. In fact, I do also hear so much of this is a time when women really jump into the self-care and really start feeling empowered to do that and really start noticing a focus on their priorities and their value in life and their values in life. And all of that can be a really wonderful process, and it can be a wonderful transition. So let's keep that in our minds too.
Yes, I'm going to just fully agree with that, right? Because I'll talk to women a lot about their cycles and stuff, and it's kind of this weird taboo thing in our culture to not talk about. But no, it's like it is a part of the divine feminine that is within you, and it is your life force expressing itself. And even when you're transitioning into a state of like perimenopause, really that's life being like, hey, now it's time to focus on you. And you get to kind of shift into this phase of your life where you get to love yourself more and you get to give yourself more of your energy because maybe, your offspring are grown or your family doesn't need as much assistance anymore. So you can actually come back to giving a bunch of energy to your own life. And I love to help women and men, whatever, you're going through the same thing if you're in the same age, right? Like children are growing, you have more time for yourself. And it's like learning to embrace aging as something that can be graceful and an honor to turn into someone that is now, more of an educator and elder to other people. And it's really you like transitioning into this phase of life that's an honor. So we'll end with that. I'm so glad you ended it that way. I love that. So have a wonderful rest of your day, you guys, and look for the recording. Reach out if you have any questions, and we'll do this again soon.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So nice to talk with you.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.